What if your only lifeline on the road, the CB radio, the next truck in the convoy, the open rest stop, was the very thing that wanted you gone? Out here, the highway doesn't need monsters. The asphalt itself can swallow you. The night can hide exits that should exist, and sometimes the voice calling your name already knows where you'll break down. Welcome back to Whispering Abyss. Tonight we're diving into the nightmares of truckers who drove into something no map can explain. Each story is a long-haul journey into fear, from phantom convoys to fuel stations trapped in endless night. Listen carefully, because the hum of tires, the hiss of brakes, even the silence after a radio cuts out, they might not be what they seem. Which story will get under your skin? Tell me in the comments once you make it through. Story 1. Dead air at exit 41. I did not plan to hear my name from a dead channel, and I sure didn't plan to answer it. But that's how the road keeps people, isn't it? I was 3 hours into a night run on 90, the kind that turns the dash glow into your only campfire. The sky was clean, stars crisp, and every sound in the cab was honest. Heater fan low, freight humming steady, CB quiet enough that I kept glancing at it just to make sure the power light was still alive. You know how silence can feel like a hell breath? That kind of quiet has weight, and someone was pressing it against my chest. The first odd thing was a detour arrow for exit 41, bright as a wet tongue. The reflective face looked freshly rinsed, beaded with droplets that caught my headlights, but the asphalt around it was powder dry. GPS didn't even list a ramp. It said 41 had been closed for months. I slowed as I passed, telling myself the county had staged signs for tomorrow's cruise. The arrow shone behind me like a cat's eye, and then I was alone again, picking up speed, hoping not to think about how it looked wet. Dispatcher wanted a radio check at 3:15. That was the rule. Miss 2 in a month, and you'd get a write-up. Miss 3, and your due day runs forever. I like nights because nobody clapped me on the back or told stories I had to nod at. Nights answer you only when you really mean it. That's what I believed before 41. At 2:12, my CB hissed. Not chatter, not a key-up pop, but a low tide of static like someone sliding a breath across the microphone screen. It builds a kind of question in you. You lean closer. You say nothing. You wait to see who else is listening. I toggled the squelch of hair. The hiss stayed. It had the shape of voice without the words. And it stopped as clean as a finger lifting from a glass rim. My cab smelled like warm dust, the way a heater does after a long summer of not being used. I cracked the vent and heard the highway like a stream. The minute ticked over to 2:13, and the CB stayed dead, which somehow felt louder than noise. Right after that, I saw cones lined like a tuning fork ahead, a narrow throat between orange plastic, and beyond it the suggestion of an on-ramp where there shouldn't be one. No work crews, no floodlights, just Sodium Street lamps buzzing that lazy insect song. The cone's reflective tape flashed with a contractor logo I hadn't seen in years, the kind of company that folded after an audit. You hear rumors about fake detours and theft rings, but those rumors always end with somebody saying could be, I guess. I eased left to give them space, try not to look for a ramp that didn't exist, and still caught it in my peripheral. The lane's shoulder dipped into a seam of darkness, like somebody had cut a slice out of the world. Fuel was at 3/4. I knew that number because I checked it twice in the last minute. Now it bobbed to a shade over half, then back up, as if it were answering a question I hadn't asked. I tapped the gauge face. The needle didn't seem to care. The engine sounded normal, the rig steady as a church. If you have ever watched a clock and felt it watch you, you know the feeling I had. At 2:14, the CB hiss came back, but this time the edges of it shaped themselves into my name. Not a voice, not really, but the suggestion of syllables that my brain wanted to hear as Rowan. I told myself I was tired and let the fan run one notch higher. The air had that warm copper smell to it, dry and metallic. I said, "Go to bed later, Ro," and the sound of my own voice felt like stepping on a thin ice. Then 2:15 landed like a stamp. The hiss cut. The cones were behind me. The dark seam shrank to a remembered idea. It would have been safe to write it off if the next sign wasn't another shiny arrow for 41. This one, not only wet but dripping. I couldn't tell if water rolled down from the face or up from the pole. My eyes do not play tricks often, but they could be persuaded, and the night is persuasive. I thought about the matchbook tucked under my visor, the one the waitress insisted I take in Port Mercy because the coffee had been on the house after my card reader died. She'd scratched 315 on the inside cover with a blunt pencil. I had laughed when I saw it, thinking she was flirting in the world's dullest way. "You'll remember," she'd said. I remembered, all right. If I missed that call, I'd be day running by the weekend. At 2:42, I saw the cones again. Not more cones. The same cones. The same scuff on the second one. The same lazy mosquito hum from the lamp. The reflective tape flashed the old contractor logo like it had a memory. My hand hovered over the CB mic, surprised by how much it weighed in that moment. I wasn't afraid exactly. I was interested in a way that felt like fear walking into the room behind me. "Breaker 19, radio check," I said because my voice had to live somewhere. The CB answered with silence, so thick it pushed my sentence back toward my teeth. The quiet had pressure. "Copy." I tried again, and the hiss slid in, carrying my name on the shape of breath. No words, just the curve of the sound. I heard the S, the glide where W would be, and then it was gone again just before the clock touched 15. I could have turned the radio off. I could have, but I needed that 3:15 check-in. Livelihood is a blunt word, but it has teeth. When you have bills, when you live on mile markers and receipts, you keep to the habits that keep you employed. So I stayed in it, let the highway draw along, my rig and needle on a thread, and told myself the night would blink out of this mood before the top of the hour. Fuel slipped to a hair under half, and stayed. The road rose like a promise and leveled into the same lonely stretch. No ramp, no brake, just the memory of cones. I pressed the matchbook open with one hand. The pencil scrawl read 3:15, and under that, a faint original printing that said call ahead. Maybe that restaurant had once taken orders by phone from the road. Maybe the matchbooks were old stock. It felt like the night had been laying props for years, waiting for me to walk into the scene. At 3:12, the static came in harder, a long exhale that made the speaker cloth tremble. "Row," it nearly said, the O trailing into the coil of the hiss like a drain. Then a click as if someone keying up had changed their mind. I looked at the clock and felt a thin, cold line on my upper lip. There's a kind of silence that feels like you're already answering, even when you haven't spoken yet. That quiet was sitting in my passenger seat, buckled in and staring. "Dispatch, this is Cutter 71, standing by," I said, voice level. Channel 19 gave me nothing. The GPS bleeped a recalculating it had no reason to give. The screen flashed, then held. The highway line thickened and thinned like a pulse seen through eyelids. "Dispatch." I tried again, thinking maybe they'd switch channels as a prank. Again, only the hiss, tasting like warm dust and the breath from the vent. The arrow for 41 appeared on my right, glossy and wet and beautiful as a fish in a lantern. The pole wore a rosary of droplets that should have thrown rainbows, but the colors were wrong, dull and coppery. I slowed. My odometer ticked, and the fuel needle sighed down to a third. My hands were dry, but I felt damp at the elbows, like there was a mist in the cab that only touched me where the air wasn't. I told myself, "Rowan, you're being baited by fatigue and a bored brain. Cones belong to old companies because cities contract cheap. Wet signs because a trucker ahead kicked up some roadside puddle. Silent radio because it's a dead window. You can explain anything if you want the explanation more than you want the truth. That is the most useful lie a road tells." At 3:14, the hiss swelled. The cones. Again, the same pattern, the same scuff. They floated in the night like a forked tuning instrument, as if the road had been made to ring at one note. I realized I had seen no tail lights in 10 minutes. No oncoming glare. Just my own beams carving space out of the dark and the sodium lamps pulsing like sleepy eyes. I slowed to 45. The ramp that did not exist stretched to my right like a mouth you imagine smiling in a photograph. If you have ever heard your own name in a voice of nobody, you know how it insists. The hiss rounded the syllables of mine. This time it carried a second sound before it cut, something like a place or a number. I heard 4 and something like 1. You already know what I thought I heard. I could have kept going. That's the truth. I could have opened the window, let in the cold, and blown past whatever game the world was playing. Instead, I did what I am ashamed of and proud of in equal measure. I took my foot off the gas and coasted until the cones were opposite my door. I keyed the mic and said, "Standing by for 315, Cutter 71. My thumb pressed that button as if it knew we were making a choice that couldn't be walked back. Immediate consequence, the road changed. Not a Hollywood change. No boy, no floss. But the curve didn't resolve where curves resolve. It lengthened and lowered, and my headlights slid across a sign that said 41 in black, official as any state sign, and below the numbers a faint ring of wetness like someone had breathed on it. The ramp opened like a dark ear listening from the grass. My GPS blinked an error message that didn't have words. Channel 19 held its breath. Somewhere in the heater, something ticked like a cricket. I guided the rig right. You do not take a closed ramp at night in a full load. You do not. My hands did anyway. It felt less like a turn and more like yielding to gravity that only I could feel. The cones flashed in the mirrors, and then they were behind me again. Every reflective stripe, a little heartbeat. If I'd looked twice, the mirror might have showed me something sitting in the passenger seat, but I did not look. The ramp dipped into a bowl of fog as discreet as steam from a cup. My high beams put up rectangles of white that ate my light and gave back only shapes. The CB speaker crackled, thin and papery. Cutter 71, copy, said a voice that was my own voice with a few minutes delay baked into it. Not a recording. Not exactly. The words had more breath in them than I had just used. This is Cutter 71, I said, and I heard myself answer myself a second time with the sentence I had just spoken. The loop overlapped by a hair like two singers out of sync. The heater cricket ticked faster. The smell of warm dust wrapped the cab, like someone's sweater left on your shoulders too long. I saw a service road sign, too modern and too old at once. It warned of low clearance that didn't match the line of the bridge ahead. The left shoulder sloped into black, and in that black I saw an older ramp, a ghost ramp, a version of this curve that had never been torn up. Sodium lamps pooled bronze light, and in one of the pools was a pay phone. It had no right to exist, but its metal box looked wet, and a handset pointed at the quivering fog like a finger. I coasted by at 10 miles an hour. My fuel needle twitched to a quarter. The clock stamped 3:15. Dispatch should have come through. Channel 19 should have been a polite chorus of bored men checking in. Instead, the hiss drew breath, and the speaker gave me my own voice again. "Standing by," said the version of me that had not yet felt how strange that fog could be. "Standing by," I repeated, and my breath clouded into the trickle of air from the vent like the cab itself was cold in there and warm out here. I realized the cones hadn't been a warning for me. They'd been a tuning fork. They made the road ring a note, and that note ate radio. The exit wasn't closed. The exit was between, and something lived in the between that needed names like the road needs salt. A shape parted the fog. Not a person. Not any shape my driver's brain could file under hazard. It was a thinner darkness, human height, with edges that were all exhale. It stood by the pay phone and leaned toward the speaker, as if listening the way I was listening. I did not see a face. I saw the idea of being watched. "Cutter 71, confirm," said the lagging me. I wanted to not answer. I wanted to jam the radio off and back up 100 yards and gash the steering wheel left, take my tires into the ditch and bounce fountain sparks off the frame if I had to. There's a part of me that only wants to break the rules on nights like that. But livelihood is a leash and habit is a fence. And the between loves fences because they make you walk along them for a long time. "Confirm," I said, and the thing by the phone straightened like it had been named. All I had given it was confirm. It seemed to be enough. It stepped once toward me, not on legs, but on the subtraction of fog from fog. The heater cricket went silent mid-tick. Red herring number 1 split. I saw the old contractor logo on the cones again, hanging in my mind like a warning about thieves. There were no thieves in that fog. The false clue was years old. The real clue had been the shape of the cones all along, tuning the air to a humming note that devoured language. I feel stupid for not knowing that sooner. But who looks at cones and thinks music? Dispatch, I said softer than I meant to. Do you have me? The radio gave me back my question in a fog-thickened echo. I keyed again, and the cab cigarette lighter popped out with a little metallic sigh. The smell of hot dust grew stronger. Condensation beaded on the mic body, cold kisses that weren't there a moment before. Water gathered where the silence was strongest. I had to make a choice. Speak my full name or leave it hanging in the fog along with 3 paychecks and a good route. The exit wanted my name because that's how you pin a loop to a person, I think. The road wanted me to keep driving and accept runs and never test a night like this again. Both roads were traps. The difference was whether I'd be trapped with myself or without myself. Rowan Cutter, confirming 315 check. I said, giving it the name the way you give a stray bread because it will either follow or leave. Immediate consequence. The fog moved like it knew me. It thinned high, dropped low, and lapped the steps of the pay phone as if it had feet and was considering boots. The shape leaned toward the mic as though it would talk if I were quiet, then pulled itself taller, and the radio spoke a version of my name that had a minute of chill in it. Rowan, it said, and the O went on long enough to make me taste copper on my tongue. The CB hissed smaller, the dead air closing like a door. The heater fan clicked down a speed without my touch. The matchbook slid from the visor and landed between my feet, splayed open like a little book you could read and never finish. The pencil scrawl of 315 had smeared into a bruise. Delayed echo. Weeks later, I would play back my dash cam audio and hear my voice answering my own sentences with an extra breath that wasn't mine. I'm getting ahead of myself. That's how echoes work. The ramp joined a service road that shouldn't exist. The fog thinned and the faint shapes of old maintenance buildings stood back from the shoulder. Their windows were papered with nothing, inside and out, and the doors were chained but bowed, like people holding their breath. A second sign said Exit 41 in a font no printer uses anymore. Wetness beaded on the numbers as if they were sweating. I pulled to a stop because if I rolled forward, I would choose to live only in questions, and that is a choice you can make once. I set the brake. The tick behind the vent resumed, faster now, like a heart rehearsing for a sprint. The shape by the phone stepped closer to my door. Outside, there were no crickets. Inside, the cricket was all I had. The door handle trembled. Not rattled, trembled, as if the cold did not know where to live and had decided to try the metal. The radio exhaled. Rowan, it said again, in a voice that had learned my vowels from the way I fear them. The smell of warm dust went sweet, like someone baking stale bread. My mouth filled with a taste like pennies you pretend not to notice. Say the rest, the not voice tried. And I understood that what it meant was the route number, the origin, the destination, all the things a check-in asks for, all the little facts that feel harmless until you realize they open you like a map. I put my hand on the mic and thought of day runs, of coworkers who would laugh if I told this, of the rule about not stopping on ramps for any reason. I thought of headlights I hadn't seen for an hour and the neat pain of that kind of loneliness. I thought of a waitress in Port Mercy who handed me a matchbook like a warning. I thought of the cones, the tuning fork, the way the hiss had shaped my name before anything else. The rest, I said, but my hand did not press the button. That was the only moment of mercy the night gave me. I set the mic down without keying and turned off the CB. Immediate consequence. Nothing happened, and I hated that more than anything. The fog held. The shape waited. The cricket in the vent clicked on, as if to say you were still here, still at the edge of your own voice. Then the truck's dome light flickered once the way old fluorescent tubes do when you touch the switch to light. A minute later, the delayed echo moved in. The phone outside rang. It rang in the way only old pay phones ring, bell and throat and breath. It rang like a memory, not quite yours. I did not answer it because I do learn sometimes, but it rang long enough that each note felt carved into the cab. The shape by the phone tilted its head, an idea of a head, and then leaned into the fog until only the ringing was left, and then not even that. I turned the CB back on because you don't leave a tool off out of pride. I keyed once without speaking, just so the road knew I knew how, and then I geared slowly forward out of the bowl, onto a stretch of service lane that fed me back into the interstate, and it seemed the GPS suddenly understood. The cones were gone behind, or maybe they were never there ahead, and the sodium lamps looked like ordinary lights that had always been there, no music in them at all. The needle climbed to half as the rig found its rhythm. Channel 19 coughed to life with a man asking if anyone had caught the deer at mile 218. I answered too fast and said my name too full, like I needed people to hear it and hold it for a second so it could cool. Nobody commented. Nobody said they'd heard dead air. That is the road's other mercy. It lets you pretend. At 3:17, the dispatcher came through, bored and a little hoarse. Cutter 71, confirm. Confirmed, I said. My voice sounded like mine again. He read back the route. I gave the details of the load. I did not say anything about fog or phones or cones. I did not say anything about the smell of hot dust that still clung to my tongue. He signed off. I signed off. The world kept its shape. About an hour later, I reached a rest area I trusted. It had a vending machine that always ate my first dollar and a janitor who nodded like we had a pact. I parked, let the engine tick itself cool, and sat listening to normal night noises. Plastic wrappers, a door creak, a sneeze. I pulled the dash cam card because I am not the version of me who lets a mystery be a friend. I didn't listen there. I wanted company for whatever I'd hear. Weeks later, when I did, I heard what I told you. My voice answering my own call with an extra breath that wasn't in my chest. Somewhere between my syllables, someone tried to learn my name like a new song. On the last file, the microphone picked up a faint metallic ring, as if it had been listening at a payphone and could not help humming along. They're the last thing I keep forgetting to mention and then remembering very late. I found a matchbook under my visor again 2 days after, even though I had thrown it in the trash at the rest area with the wrappers and the coffee lids. The pencil 315 had smeared to nothing. The printed words under it had changed. The old letters had dried themselves into a different message, or maybe I had never read them right the first time. It said, in ink that the night makes from itself, call ahead. I have not driven past exit 41 again. The county map says it's due to reopen any month now. The contractor's new logo is tasteful and modern. The cones in their photos layer neatly, no tuning fork in sight. But sometimes at 12 past the hour, my home radio hisses in a room where it shouldn't, and the house smells like warm dust when the heat isn't on. And I tell myself that's just how older electronics are. If you hear your name in the in-between, don't fill the silence with it. Let the road keep some things. Let the night keep the rest. And if you ever see a sign that looks wet under a dry sky, check your clock. If it is 3:12 and your CB breathes like it has lungs, go past and do not answer, because the between is patient and likes to learn, and a name is a key you only have once. Now we move to you for a choice. Story 2. The convoy that wasn't there. I caught up to a convoy that didn't exist, and I stayed with it because it felt safer than being alone, which is how you make the first mistake, isn't it? Night work keeps me honest. The cab is a room with one light and one purpose. My company calls at set times, my logs sync every hour, and if I keep my wheels turning, the bills at home sit quiet. I was running west toward a mountain tunnel slated to shut at 2:45 a.m. for blasting. Clear night, dry road, good tires. The world made sense until the brake lights ahead started blinking in perfect time, like a pulse answering mine. I don't mean they flashed randomly. I mean they pulsed. Red, dark, red, dark, all at once. All rigs, all lanes, like one body borrowing a dozen skins and breathing in the open road. Have you ever seen a line of trucks stop in sync without a lead car or trooper? Yeah, me neither, until that hour, and even now I question what I think I saw. I nudged the CB. Breaker 19. Convoy ahead, you boys hearing me? The speaker hissed, then settled. The humidity in the cab wasn't humidity. It was the smell of hot rubber after a day's drive, thick and sweet, like a tire store on a July afternoon. I cracked the vent, and it didn't change. The smell just rode with me like a passenger. That was odd, but the red rhythm kept my attention. My GPS showed empty road. No pings, no dots. The way station 10 miles back had logged only me after midnight. If the road was blind, my eyes weren't. There were trailers up there, dark shapes stacked with reflective tape, each bumper a mouth of red that opened and closed in time. I dropped 2 miles an hour and watched their sequence tighten, as if the lights were waiting for me to listen harder. What kind of taillights wait for anything? Night dispatch, Cutter 7-1, I called. Any info on a convoy westbound before the tunnel? The radio spoke with my dispatcher's voice. Same sleepy rasp, same coffee burn laugh at the end of words. Stay with them, he said, and I didn't remember asking a question that needed those words. You're good, Cutter. Drive with them. The channel clicked, and the hiss returned like breath on glass. I know how that sounds, but it was his voice, or an impression of it, so close you'd put money on it. Between the blinking reds, white paint lines flickered by and my odometer ticked. 10 miles flared up, then nothing for a while, then 10 more like distance had decided to move in steps instead of a smooth walk. I tapped the dash. The needle didn't care. A billboard rolled up on the right, half torn away. Drive with them was all the wind had left of it, the rest flapping into letters that didn't connect. Safety ad, probably. It felt handwritten just for me. I pulled to the right lane, eased closer, and counted the trailers I'd have it. 3, then 5, then 9, the number growing without adding trucks. And don't ask me to explain that because I can't. Every time I thought I had one, the distance stretched, and every time I looked down to check my speed, the odometer hopped another 10 like a song skipping ahead to a familiar chorus. If you've ever felt time get slippery, you know the itch that crawled up my neck. A trailer ahead had a scuff on the lower left door. The pattern sat in my brain wrong. I didn't know why until my headlights lit the number stenciled on the top hinge. It was mine, not my company's. Mine, Cutter 71. I blinked hard and the number blurred, shifted, then steadied back to the code on that particular piece of steel. I'd swear the scuff mark matched where a forklift once kissed my door in Laconia. You tell yourself you're seeing patterns because you're tired. Tired isn't an answer when the road does arithmetic with you. Cutter, your pace is good. My dispatcher said on 19, same patient tone he uses with rookies during wideouts. Stay in line, and you'll make the tunnel before the seal. I pressed the mic, then let it go. I wanted to hear someone else call his name. Anyone. Instead, other voices chimed in, different accents, different pacing, but all of them were him under the disguise. If you've ever heard the same joke in 5 voices, you know the feeling of a mask that keeps changing but never leaves. I reached the tunnel staging area with 20 minutes to spare. Orange lights sprinkled the roadside like fireflies that had forgotten how to move. The synced brake lights flowed into the entrance ahead in that steady pulse. Construction signs flashed words that weren't in any manual I know. All vehicles out by 2:45, then a softer message that wavered like a heat mirage. Stay with them. I thought about the billboard and felt stupid for feeling comfort. As I rolled down into the throat of the tunnel, the sound changed. The hum of engines didn't layer. It blended. One tone, low and even, patted the hearing like a hand on your ear. My own RPM rose, and the pitch rose with it. Not in steps, but like it knew. The smell of the overheated rubber didn't budge, as if the air was recycling a memory that belonged to these walls. If you've ever walked into a room where a fight just happened, you know the way air can hold onto events. I kept my tires a clean 2 stripes inside the lane. The convoy's lights gave me a metronome to trust. Red, dark, red, dark. The rhythm sank into my foot, and I found myself braking in time with it, accelerating in time with it, a human mirror to whatever was leading the line. My GPS told me I was alone. The tunnel cameras, if they were on, showed me a clear 2 with 1 truck in it. I didn't know that until later, but I think the air knew, and that's why it smelled like burning. Cutter 7-1, my dispatcher said. Confirm you are in the convoy. I hit the mic because habit can keep you alive or kill you, and sometimes you only learn which after. Confirmed, I said, and the word spun in the speaker a fraction later, a small echo wearing the exact grooves of my voice. Confirmed, my voice said back, quieter, as if it wished it had been braver. If that doesn't chill you, you haven't heard yourself on the outside, sounding wrong. The tunnel walls were bare concrete, taking the light like skin takes a sunburn. The sink brake lights painted the ceiling veins. The odor sharpened, and I bit the air like it was edible and bitter. The mileage ticked in clean tens. My clock slid 5 minutes ahead without passing through the minutes between. I checked my wristwatch, and it was correct. The dash clock had decided to be helpful, which is worse than broken, because you think you can trust it. Halfway in, the right lane closed into cones with reflective tape that pulsed with every break. The convoy didn't merge so much as narrow. The trucks thinned while staying the same number. I know that sentence is nonsense. It was nonsense to watch. Each set of lights ahead shared a rhythm. Then another set slid into them without overlap, and still I counted the same. When I blinked, the whole line jumped forward 10 truck lengths and settled back all in the time it takes to say what. The odometer hopped at the same instant, and I didn't like the implication. Work zone to the left, I said for no one in particular. The radio coughed. Stay with them, my dispatcher told me. You're running clean. I wanted to hear another driver call my name. I wanted to joke about coffee or complain about DOT. Even a cough would have mint company. The hum in the tunnel rolled on, one long note that vibrated inside the bones next to my ears. If you've ever had a tuning fork touched to your jaw, you know. An emergency bay opened on the right. Border concrete. No extinguisher. No phone. The convoy's lights flowed past like a red river. The bay would have let me stop and let the line go. The safer choice, the one you make in a manual, is to pull in, wait it out, radio for a slow roll. I edged toward it and saw something I was lucky to see, if luck is the word. The painted rectangle carried no reflection from the lights. It swallowed the red like cloth drinks blood. If I had parked there, I think the bay would have kept me. The ticking sign at the tunnel's far end read 2:38. I had 7 minutes until seal. On my left, a work truck sat with its hazard lights flashing. The flash wasn't a two-beat. It synced to the convoy's pulse, fell in line, and I saw the shadow of the work truck slide up the wall out of pace with the body that cast it. Shadows are honest in a way people aren't. That one was honest enough to say this was all wrong. The voice that wasn't my dispatcher, but could have fooled his own wife, said, "All vehicles clear by 2:45, Cutter. Keep position." I gripped the wheel hard enough that the skin at my knuckles went shiny. The trailer ahead of me wore a dent that matched mine so perfectly that for a second I believed I was driving behind myself. The white paint of the lane vibrated like it was alive. Red. Dark. Red. The road pulsed with the same beat, and I could feel it in my teeth. The left lane came back, and a convoy poured across without a blinker. The hum rose in pitch, but didn't change note. You know how impossible that is, but that's what happened, and if I didn't have a scar on my steering palm from that night to remind me, I'd let you tell me I dreamed it. My palms ached. I shifted up one gear, and the odometer hopped ahead another 10 miles like it was proud to help. A laugh scraped the back of the radio, almost human, almost a transmission artifact, and I understood the joke was me. 2:42. I had 3 minutes to leave the mouth. The convoy slowed, and the red tide shimmered. That was the first real kindness it showed me, because the slowing made me decide. Stay tucked into the pulse. Trust a thing that wore the shape of safety and might keep me in here until a door came down forever, or peel out and find out what oncoming traffic looks like when a road says there is none. Choice is a nice word. It didn't feel like a nice thing in that moment. I pulled left across the double yellow and gave the engine my foot. The hum beneath the hum turned sharp, like teeth on a tuning fork. Brake lights crowded my windshield, not closer but bigger, the way a wave gets big when it rises. The smell of hot rubber turned thick enough to chew. The wheel vibrated like I had a flat, even though the gauges sang perfect. If you've ever outrun a dog that only wants to run because you are running, you know the fear that slicks your hands. The convoy folded. That's the only word that works. The red lights stitched inward, lane to lane, line to line, until they were a single red disc floating in my high beams. I saw the curve of it in the polished tunnel wall. The disc wasn't a lamp. It was absence glowing the way a wound glows when you press on it. The hum peaked. The mile counter jumped. 10, then 20, then stopped. The tunnel's exit framed the night like a picture that wants to be stolen. "Cutter," my dispatcher said, except it was my voice saying my name in his cadence. Drive with them. I thought I was done being startled. I was wrong. The words came from my throat without passing through my mouth. The radio echoed them a fraction late, adding breath I didn't take. My lights hit the end signage. 244 clicked to 245 without the in-between. A metal door began to drop inside the frame. I committed. I hugged the left lane and drove at the red disc like it was a trick mirror at a carnival. The odometer didn't move. All at once the hum split into 3 notes and then none, as if a hand pulled a plug out of the wall. For one instant, and I swear this is true, my cab lights reflected in a row of windshields that weren't there, and the smell of burning rubber vanished like a curtain pulled back from a doorway. I burst out into cold air and clear stars, and the door slammed behind with a thump you feel in the ribs. I drove 3 miles before I remembered to breathe properly. The radio leveled into normal road talk. Somebody joked about a raccoon looking both ways. I laughed too hard and cut it off mid-sound. Cutter 7-1, my real dispatcher said, the tired kindness back in place. You make the tunnel. I considered saying something sane. Yeah, I told him. Easy ride. The words tasted like I'd said them in someone else's kitchen. At the next turnout, I stopped to check the tires. They were warm, but not hot. No varning Smith. The trailer doors were only the old scars I knew. In the mirror, the tunnel's mountain was just a shape. No red, no disc. I stood in the silent cold and listened for anything that would argue with me. An owl gave me its opinion from a pine. The night smelled like normal night. If you've ever had a bad dream in a familiar room, you know how quickly furniture forgives. I didn't look at the dash cam in that turnout. I waited until morning in a diner at County over, coffee working my hands, eggs going cold while I switched cards and watched the tunnel footage with headphones on. What it showed wasn't a convoy. I knew it before the first frame finished loading from the jitter. The lens took in concrete, dotted lights, my own headlights carving a cone. The road ahead was naked. My truck followed nothing but the suggestion of momentum. And yet my brake lights, caught in reflectors at intervals along the wall, pulsed in one steady rhythm like I had been taking instructions for myself. I scrolled the audio back and forth, fingers clumsy with too little sleep. The voices on 19 were my dispatcher's voice clipped from wrap-ups over months, stitched together into reassurances I wanted to hear. I heard myself say confirm twice, once into the mic, once a second later in a lower tone like a rehearsal. The odometer data, my ELD, saved in the background read, in neat tins, a pattern no trip recorder should make unless someone said it that way. Nobody said it, not anyone with a name. Back at my cab, while the sun did its best to make everything clean, the smell of hot rubber felt lodged in the upholstery like a burned song. I cracked both doors. I wiped the dash. It faded slowly, as if the night were still finishing. Have you ever cleaned after something you're not sure happened? It feels like tidying up a missing scene. I don't recommend it. Later that week, at the way station, a friend behind the glass pulled my log just to see if the tunnel crew had filed any notes. They hadn't. His printout showed me entering at 2:30 and exiting at 2:45 alone. No convoy, no work truck, no closures beyond the door. The cameras, he said, have been broken for months, budget cut after budget cut. He slid the paper through and told me not to read scary forums before bed. I told him I watched cooking videos. He said that was worse. You want a final image, something to carry into your next driving night. I'll give you one. Last evening, home in the driveway, I tapped my brake to check the trailer harness. The garage door lit up red. Red. Dark. Red. Dark. A perfect beat, steady as a vein. I took my foot off the pedal, and the rhythm carried on one more cycle, as if finishing by choice. The smell of hot rubber lifted off the floor mat and drifted toward the closed door. I stood very still and waited for it to fade, which it did, as if obeying someone polite. Maybe the broken billboard was for a campaign I missed. Maybe the dispatch recordings glitched into a joke the road played because it could. Maybe I never saw my own trailer number ahead of me, and my brain borrowed from memory to keep afraid of the right things. That is a comfort some nights. Other nights, I think about a single thing in the dark wearing many shapes to make the world feel full. The road is kind that way. It hates to see a person alone. If you ever meet a line of brake lights that match your heartbeat, don't ask permission. Don't wait for a voice to tell you to stay with them. Pull out. Take the empty lane. Let the red become small behind you. And check your odometer when you stop. If it's skipped ahead in tens, don't say a word aloud. Things learn for what you tell them. Story 3. Cargo bay echoes. I signed for a sealed trailer that I was not allowed to inspect, and the first knock from inside spelled my name in the kind of silence you only hear after midnight, if you get what I mean. The manifest was simple. Delivered to a warehouse by 4 a.m. sharp. No stops besides fuel. Do not engage with cargo. That exact wording sat on a sheet taped to the bulkhead. Do not engage. The ink looked weird, smeared on certain letters, like it had been written over the original print. The seal tag on the doors had numbers that read the same in the mirror. I remember thinking that was a cute security trick while the air around the hitch smelled faintly like cold iron left in rain, which made no sense on a dry night. I rolled east. The road was empty enough that the lines felt like a metronome. I told myself to keep the radio low and the mind busy. Around 1 a.m., the CB burped and played back something I'd said 10 minutes earlier about coffee being gasoline for people. The timing was wrong. Static does not have a memory. I turned the volume down and said nothing for a while. 10 miles later, I heard my laugh come out of the speaker, a small sound that did not belong to any other man on 19, which put a splinter under my skin. At the fuel island, a clerk handed me my receipt and then jolted a little when the printer spit out a second one without being told. Must be the sensor, he said, tearing it off, handing me both. Each copy printed lighter, like a carbon shadow. A driver at the next pump grinned and said he heard me talking to myself in the lot earlier. I told him I had not been in the lot. He shrugged. Could have sworn I heard you say I'll open it soon, he said, and I felt the cold iron smell rise in the back of my throat. I parked at the far edge for a quick log update. The trailer made the tiny sounds metal makes when it settles. Ping, tick, little breaths. Then 3 soft knocks came from the deep middle, not the doors, and I froze with my pen hovering over the page. They were regular, like someone tapping out a beat. I told the empty cab, it is just cardboard shifting under straps, and the words came back through the wall a second later in a muffled whisper with a metallic ring to it. Just cardboard shifting. Hearing your voice with extra echo is like tasting your own name. I got out with my flashlight and put a hand on the cold handle of the right door. The seal was intact. Frost slicked the metal around the latch in a perfect little crescent, even though the night was warm enough to carry bugs. My breath fogged, though the air should not have taken it. Anyone in there? I asked, because that is what you ask when you do not want an answer. Inside, the same question returned in a thinner version of my voice, missing the I and the N like a recording with the edges rubbed off. Anyone there? I called dispatch. He answered on the second ring, bored but awake, and told me not to engage with cargo. Company policy, he said, and reminded me of the 4 a.m. deadline. He sounded like he always did. The line cut briefly, and under the stutter, I heard a second copy of him speaking my name a half-beat late. My phone had never done that. I hung up. Behind me, the trailer repeated, softly, not to engage with cargo, and the words took on a strange shape like someone who had learned English from a mirror. Okay, I said to the night, funny, and slid back into the cab. I put the truck in gear and pulled to a darker corner of the lot and told myself not to think about the frost crescent or the clerk who heard a promise I hadn't made. The muffled voice inside tried a new game. It began repeating what I said before I said it. The first time was small. I thought about turning the dome light on, and the cargo whispered, do not, and I flicked the switch a second later like a man, went along with a suggestion he didn't feel. If you have ever felt your choices arrive late, you know, the stakes should have been simple. If I broke the seal, I would be fired. If I missed the deadline, I would lose night runs. If I told anyone that my trailer talked, I would lose more than a route. That is the ladder you climb when you think you're still on the ground. By 2 in the morning, other drivers in the lot gave me looks like I was talking to somebody in the passenger seat. One said, quiet, how's a man talk over himself like that? And I realized the echo in my trailer had leaked into the space around my truck like heat that refuses to stay in a bowl. I pulled back onto the highway because motion is a myth that makes you feel safe. The smell of cold iron rode with me, clean and wrong at once. The knocks returned, then the words, then a voice that could not decide if it wanted to be mine or something hollow that remembered me incorrectly. If you have ever heard a song you love from another room and realized the melody has shifted, that was the way it reached for me. At 3 a.m., the CB spit out a phrase from last week's run. "Clear lanes," it said in my voice. Not the words, the voice. I tried distraction. I sang a stupid chorus under my breath. The trailer found it and sang it back one word ahead, like a kid showing off, and immediately I stepped on the brake for a slower car I had not seen. The echo had picked a timing that put the red glow on the windshield as if it knew when my foot would move. It was not reading my mind. It was reading the shape of my next word, and that is worse if you think about it. By 3:20, I stopped thinking and started counting mile markers just to hear something only I could make. I pulled onto the shoulder a mile before the exit to the industrial park that led to my delivery. The seal numbers threw back my headlamp in reverse, crisp as teeth. You know how a zipper will tug at your attention no matter how much you tell yourself not to pull it? That was the feeling. The do not engage sentence on the bulkhead had pilled at the letters like cloth. Ink bubbled over ink. It was not printed. It had been rewritten by hand, and the hand had argued with itself about how firm to be. I put my palm on the door. It was so cold the skin felt squeaky. I told myself I would just listen. The metal hummed like a drum, small vibrations you get from a long load moving. Then it spoke my name the way you would speak into a tin can, and a smaller version of the same voice under it said my name again a breath earlier, like an echo caught on the wrong side of the wall. The two kissed at the middle. I do not mind telling you I wanted to run right then. Running would have cost me my job. Not running might have cost me more. I dialed 911, thumb steady, mouth dry. The call connected, and the operator asked my location. While I told her the mile marker, the voice in the trailer gave the same mile marker a shade ahead of me, falsifying by a tenth, already learning to get me wrong in polite ways. "Do you require police, fire, or medical?" she said, and the trailer answered with police in a tone that felt mean, which made me close my mouth and listen. Nothing about emergency services belongs in a mirror. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the little window on the back of the cab until the glass decided not to reflect anymore. By 3:35, the knocks had become words that only wanted one thing. "Final word," it said, and then softer before the hour. I tasted the sentence like metal filings. I tested it. If I say the final word, what do I get? I asked because fear likes rules. The answer came back in that hollow reverb. "You get to be first," it said, and I did not like the possible meanings of that because all of them felt like a trap with my shape cut out of the cardboard. I had to decide, open a sealed trailer and lose work for a lie I could live with, or keep a promise to a company and deliver something I did not understand to men who would put it in another box. The voice began to push its imitations closer to the present. My mouth would form a word, and the echo would already be saying the next one, like we're in a three-legged race and it had the stronger leg. The iron smell hung like a cold towel over the seat. I chose wrong or right, depending on whether you value employment or sleep. I cut the seal. The zip sang, and the tag fell like a coin. I unlatched both doors, and they swung open into a box that held no pallets, no straps, no mundane explanation. Only a rectangle of air, so still it looked varnished. My flashlight beam went matte. The floor was ribbed aluminum, and it had a frosting of moisture that steamed lightly without sending steam anywhere. The voice did not come from a point. It came from the whole space. It said my name in 5 different inflections, one of them the way my mother used to when she was disappointed and wanted me to listen. I stepped up once, boots loud in the hollow. The sound took my step and offered it back to me a heartbeat earlier, as if to say, "See, we can save you time." I said no, quietly, and the trailer said, "No, yes," a hybrid that made no language sense and all the instinct sense in the world. The ribbed floor printed a film of frost in the shape of letters that were mine, but backward, like the seal numbers. Rowan looked wrong that way. I refused to say the final word it wanted. I do not know what the word was. I suspect it might have been my name arranged into a shape I could not leave. The doors tried to close by themselves with the lazy speed that belongs to old hinges. I should have let them. I set my shoulder against the left door instead and gave the box what it wanted least, which was quiet. I held my breath and said nothing for a long count. The echo hates silence because it cannot own it. The knocks returned, frantic and childish. The voice fell into smaller versions of me, like hearing your own phone messages from 6 years ago. "Do not engage," it said, and then engaged itself, arguing about it in tones that were mine and mine but older. It offered bargains. It told me what I would say if I let it back me. It told me the morning would be easier if I stopped trying to speak alone. It told me my voice didn't have to be heavy anymore. The ticking in my head said 350, 355, and the highway at the edge of the lot whispered rush hour that did not exist yet. Final word, it asked sweetly, and I made a choice that sounded small but cost a lot of sleep. I shut the doors hard. I looped a spare zip through the hasp. I took a photo of the broken seal and the new one. I started the engine and left the lot without speaking to the space behind me again. The cargo did not like being locked out of me. It tried a new trick. My CB lit on its own, and my own cadence told dispatch my ETA A-OK, and the sentence appeared on the display a fraction before the sound, like a subtitle for a movie that had already seen itself. I turned the radio knob to off, and it stayed glowing. You know that feeling when electronics decide they live by themselves. I drove the last 10 miles with the windows cracked, the old iron smell thinning in little strands behind me, like thread the night was measuring. I hit the dock at 3:59 by the warehouse clock. A board foreman scanned the barcode and nodded at my replacement seal without caring. The doors rolled open, and the dock men stood there looking into a rectangle of cold nothing. The air on the dock frosted from the middle out. One kid rubbed his forearm where the hair stood up and made a joke about cryo shipping. We all laughed too short. He closed the doors and slapped the side twice, and I felt those 2 knocks an inch behind my sternum, which made me smile wrong at a man who did not deserve that. I finished the paperwork in a small office that had a mounted television playing looped camera feeds. On the screen, I watched my truck arrive. The angle from above the dock caught the back doors, the vanish of air, the foreman's shrug. The camera cut to a lot view for a second. I saw me climb down and walk toward the office, and behind me, I saw a dark second shape take the same steps but a fraction ahead, like an overeager shadow. No limbs, no head, just a thickness that wanted to be me. The timestamp flickered, and the shape forgot to stick to the ground for a moment before the picture changed. I asked the foreman if their cameras ever glitch like that. He said he did not see anything and asked if I wanted a copy of my arrival for the file. I said no, like a whisper belongs to the floor. My phone buzzed. A message from a fuel station showed 2 separate charges time stamped within the same minute. The duplicate receipt sat in my pocket. It was lighter than paper should be, almost translucent, as if half of it wanted to be where the camera shadow lived. I drove home at sunrise and set the windows ajar again, even though the morning was cold. Inside the cab, the smell was still there in places air can't reach. I parked in my driveway, and the quiet settled over the house like a blanket that remembers you. In my kitchen, the radio on the counter clicked without being touched and played back my voice asking for coffee from the day before. Not the words, the breath between. I unplugged it, and the last syllable kept going for a heartbeat on unplugged power, making me stand very still and count the quiet. I wish I could tell you that nothing followed me past that. I sleep fine some nights. Other nights, I hear a knock behind the glove compartment like a memory rattling in a tin. Sometimes I test it. I whisper, "Good night," and the house answers "good now" in a smaller version of me that wants to be first. If your walls ever return your voice 1 second ahead, do not give them the final word they ask for. Names are keys that do not like to be duplicated. Story 4. The gas station with no morning. I pulled into a desert gas station where every clock said 3:07 a.m., and 5 minutes later they still said 3:07, which is the kind of detail you ignore once, then never again. The place glowed alone off a flat stretch of highway, a square of neon in the middle of sand. The sign promised morning fuel, next exit. Cute marketing, I thought, until I rolled beneath humming tubes that flickered like a pulse you could see. Citrus air freshener hit me when I opened the door, That dollar store orange that tries to smell like breakfast and misses. The pumps chimed ready. The convenience store lights had that hospital brightness that makes everything look guilty. It felt safe enough until my eyes found the first clock on the wall and learned it never moved. Inside, 2 clerks stood behind the counter with the same tired kindness. The man scanned gum without looking. The woman asked if I wanted a receipt before I had paid. Their voices ran on grooves, like a record that had been played flat. Both clocks behind them read 3:07. The cooler door in the back had a digital thermometer stuck at 37.0. I watched the seconds on my phone push to 3:08. The store clocks kept their secret. The woman smiled, almost pretty, and said, "Almost morning, the way you say small talk when you have nothing else." I smiled back because you do that for strangers at night, even when the air smells like citrus and static. I grabbed coffee and a bottle of water and paid cash to keep my head clear. The receipt printer chirped and spit a slip that curled on itself like a little white tongue. Total, 7.11. Time, 3:07 a.m. I told her clock was off. She tilted her head like she didn't understand the words, then slid a second paper toward me without hitting any keys. Another receipt unfurled. Same total, same time. My skin crawled in a polite way, the way it does when someone says your name wrong but means well. If you have ever felt a room run on instructions, you know the itch. The payphone near the door rang. Nobody flinched. I looked at the clerks. The man said, "That will be for you," not looking up from his gum. The phone rang the way old phones ring, a bell that remembers houses with carpets. I picked it up because manners survive where reason fails. Cutter 71, my dispatcher said, "Say midnight rasp. You haven't moved in 20 minutes. Confirm." The handset was cool and smelled faintly of copper. "I just pulled in," I said, staring at my truck idling at the pump through the glass. "Almost morning," the woman behind me repeated, soft as a lullaby. On the phone, my dispatcher said, "Almost morning," in her tone, which is when the sweat started, slow and stubborn. I hung up and walked back out under the neon heartbeat. The pump read 0 like I had never fueled. My tank needle shrugged back to where it had been before I turned in. A moth burned itself against the Owen open and kept going as if pain were a loop. "No," I said to no one, and got in the cab and pulled out with that careful throttle you use when you want to be casual. The highway swallowed me in its cool, dark mouth. The stars hung so close the windshield felt thin. I drove 6 miles by the odometer and saw the station again. Same exit, same billboard promising morning fuel. Next exit, as if the road had rolled out and then rolled back under me. Maybe there were 2 stations. Maybe the desert doesn't like straight lines. I took the exit again because doubt loves evidence. The neon pulsed in time with my heart and then dragged it half a second off. The air hit me with citrus, old coffee, and the dry sweetness of receipt paper. Inside, the clerks stood in the same positions, the man peeling back the foil on a gum pack that already had the foil peeled, the woman cradling the receipt tray like it might sing to her. The clock said 3:07 in big, friendly digits, as if to reassure me that nothing was happening. I tried to buy nothing. I stood there pretending to browse while not touching anything, and the register printed a receipt that curled and fell to the floor. Total, 7.11. Time, 3:07 a.m., almost morning, the woman said without looking at me. The man added, "Won't be long." His eyes slid past me to the door like he expected the sky to turn. When I asked, and both of them answered together, 17, which made no sense until the sign above the coffee urn flickered to life. Morning, in 17 minutes. The numerals ticked to 16, then 15, then stalled and shivered back to 17 like a fish refusing a hook. If you have ever watched a timer decide it loves itself too much to end, you know the feeling behind my teeth. I pulled out again, slower this time, as if you can sneak past the idea of a place. The highway ran black and straight. My GPS spun, then righted itself. Dispatch called my cell. "Stop playing games," he said. "You've been at the pump for 30 minutes with a card in." I told him I paid cash. He went quiet, then said my name the way a person tests a word. "Almost morning," he whispered, then cleared his throat and said he'd call me back. When the line died, the payphone at the station rang in my memory like I'd left the door open. On the third arrival, the clerk glanced at me and broke pattern. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Do not wait for morning," she said under the citrus, voice pulled thin. The man winced like that hurt him. The countdown stuttered at 17 again and again, as if the sign could only count in promises. I leaned on the counter and asked what happened at 0. "We don't know," the man said, and that sounded like the most honest thing in the room. "Do you see anyone else?" I asked. He looked at the floor and said, "Sometimes," and the receipt printer coughed out 3 slips in a row like a nervous tick. I tried stupid fixes. Unplugged the sign. It stayed lit. Gently stopped the receipt paper with my hand. It printed on my skin, and the ink sunk cold before it faded. I walked the aisles, slowly looking for a window without reflection. Every glass panel threw back my face with a half-second lag, a smile that arrived out of sync. When I pushed on the door to leave, the bell above it rang like a heartbeat inside a throat. If you've ever been late for something that matters and found your car keeps forgetting the way, you know the mild panic that starts to feel like your blood is lying. I chose the worst best option. Off-road. Every rule in me shouted against it. A loaded rig on desert crust is a recipe for bones. But the asphalt belonged to the station, and the station had decided morning was a word it owned. I fueled to full on the house because the pump insisted and pointed my nose at the black between the black and drove slow into scrub and pale grass and the kind of sand that usually keeps secrets. The tires should have sunk. The frame should have screamed. Instead, the ground felt firm as polished concrete, the neon glow stroking the mirrors like it owned the horizon. I killed my headlights and let starlight take me. The neon didn't dim. It stayed visible in my back like a pulse in a throat that won't calm. I aimed by the faint ribbon of mountains. The cab filled with the smell of dry earth instead of citrus, and my shoulders dropped the way your shoulders do when a song finally ends. I smiled like a fool and then felt the smile stick. A minute later, the glow moved ahead of me, low on the right, exactly where an exit ramp would be if an exit could follow a person. The billboard rose out of the sand, perfect and impossible. Morning fuel, next exit, as if someone had unrolled the world by hand to make sure I stayed. I could have gone back to the blacktop and pretended I needed a snack. That is how you lose a night. I kept off-road, slower now, and the terrain grew teeth it could not use on me. The truck floated. The weeds pressed against the tires and left no marks. My speedometer read a steady 40 even when my foot lifted. The neon heartbeat kept my pulse, a sympathetic drum against my ribs. I started to whisper to you, yes you, the way I do at the wheel when the cab gets too quiet. I said, if there's a rule here, I don't know it. And the desert answered with a distant crack of something metal cooling, as if to say rules are for places that love people. The fourth time I arrived, the clerks looked tired in a way I hadn't seen. The woman's hair had lost a strand to the static, and it clung to her cheek with annoying tenderness. The man pressed both palms flat on the counter like he needed the counter to remind him he had weight. You left, he said, surprised. You came back, she answered, not asking. Their clocks considered moving, trembled, then held. The sign whispered morning in 17 minutes, and I believed it for a second, that sweet, stupid second when hope becomes a trap and smiles. What happens if I wait? I asked anyway, because fear asks why even when no answer saves you. The woman took a breath like a person about to dive into cold water. People fade at the edges, she said. They stop seeing themselves in the glass. They stop caring what hour it is. They say yes when the sign hits 0. The man flinched. We don't watch, he added, but we hear the bell ring and ring. He looked at the payphone as if counting rings in his sleep. Dispatch called the payphone while I was holding the cord in my hand, and the clerk's explanation was still rattling around my ribs. I answered because old habits are loyal. Almost morning, my dispatcher crooned, and the line carried something like the squeal of a receipt roll against the spindle. I said my name just to hear it. The voice tried to say it back and missed a syllable like chewing. The neon outside fluttered once like a heart skipping, then found the beat again as if proud. If you have ever heard a lie and want to give it the shape of a truth, you know my urge to agree. I did what the station would not expect. I asked for a pen. The woman blinked like I had thrown a pebble at a frozen pond. She gave me a ballpoint that smelled like citrus, of course. I crossed out 307 on the receipts and wrote 308. I taped one to my windshield with a piece of gum I didn't want. I took all the clocks within reach and set them ahead to 309, which did nothing to their faces, but the act felt like scratching my name into a locked door. Then I walked outside to the neon open and put my hand on the glass and spoke softly like a person at a bedside. I will not wait for morning, I told it. The tubes hummed. The pulse tripled, then hesitated. I shut my eyes and pictured the sun as a coin in a child's hand. I pictured heat lifting off a Tulane. I pictured birds. You may call that silly. The sign flickered in a stutter and went dark for the length of a single blink. The countdown inside trembled to 16, to 15, to 14, hurried like a heart embarrassed, then spasmed back to 17 in defeat. Something in the wiring sighed, like a person misses a step on the stairs. It was enough. I got in my truck, put the citrus pen in the cup holder, and drove into the desert again, aimed at nothing but the cold notion of east. The ground remained impossibly kind, a whispering floor that wanted me gone. The neon kept pace for a mile, then shrank to a lesser star, then went out altogether like a candle someone finally permitted to fail. When I found the highway, it was a new line under a new sky, and my GPS made a happy chirp like a dog seeing home. In daylight, the station exists on maps and in stories from drivers who say the coffee is weak, but the clerks are sweet. If you stop there after sunrise, you will find clocks that tick and receipts that print real times, and an open sign that blinks like any other. I do not recommend testing the night shift. I delivered late and took my penalty like a man grateful for a number he could pay. My dispatcher rolled his eyes and asked if I'd found a desert party. I told him I had taken a wrong exit and left it at that, because you can make an enemy of truth if you talk to it too loudly. The delayed echo came a week later at home. I opened my wallet to toss old slips and found one receipt from that night, hidden behind a diner loyalty card. Total, 7.11. Time, 3:07 a.m. Date, that day the day I was holding it. I laughed without humor and wrote the actual date on it in black marker. The ink bled and turned my numbers into a smudge that looked like the word morning, if you were generous. I tucked the slip into a drawer because fire feels like respect sometimes, and I didn't want to feed it. Every now and then my kitchen radio clicks on by itself at 3:07 and plays a heartbeat I can almost name. Every now and then the citrus pen in my truck leaks a single drop without running dry. On an empty road at night, you might see an exit you don't remember and a billboard that promises morning like a person promises they'll change. If you take it and walk inside, be polite to the clerks and keep your voice your own. Do not wait for the countdown to end. Do not let the sign teach your pulse its song. If you ever find yourself standing under neon that breathes with you, ask what time it is and then look at your own watch instead. If the two do not agree, leave without buying. If a receipt curls itself off the counter like a little tongue that wants to taste your name, do not take it home. And if someone tells you almost morning in that sweet, well-meaning way, remember this. Some places use dawn as bait. Story 5. Jackknife it into nowhere, I swerved to miss a deer with eyes like mirrors, felt the trailer swing, and ended up jackknife it across both lanes under a sky, so clean it cut. I killed the engine and climbed down into a smell like damp asphalt after rain. Only it hadn't rained. The fog rolled in from nowhere and made both directions of the highway erase themselves to a gray throat. There were no skid marks behind my tires. There was no deer. My hazard lights ticked like a metronome in a quiet room, and I told myself help would find me, which was my first mistake, wasn't it? The hazard tick took my pulse and then set it. I walked 30 steps east, counting, and when I turned, the truck sat in front of me at the same skewed angle, hazards blinking their patient blink. I paced west, and the same thing happened, the rig waiting like a dog that keeps cheating at fetch. If you have ever tried to run in a dream and felt the floor stay with your feet, you know the way the road decided me. I called dispatch, and he said they saw me moving fine on GPS, steady as a needle, which made me look at the fog as if it could laugh. I set 3 triangles out by habit and turned back to admire my responsibility. They were gone when I blinked. Not kicked, not blown, gone, as if the night had simply redrawn itself without them. The hazard ticked slow to hair, stretching the quiet between beats like a rubber band. I crouched and touched the pavement where my skid should have written what happened. My fingers came up wet with nothing. The fog at the edge of my vision thickened, as if encouraged, and the deer I almost hit flickered there, still and wrong, eyes reflecting my hazard lights like 2 red coins. There's a ladder you climb when you think you are sensible. Delivery before dawn or a penalty. A dispatcher who has let you be a night driver because you do not cause messes. A body that still remembers black ice from a winter a decade ago. The scrape of guardrail, the way a man named Blake said is fine. Man, on a night it wasn't. The fog started telling me small stories in a hush, like tires on wet. I heard my own voice say you were okay from that winter. Then I heard Blake say it back, the second time with the breath upside down, like the fog had put his lungs somewhere else. I tried the obvious stupid thing. I climbed back in the cab and gave it a little throttle to straighten the angle. The engine didn't fight. The wheels rolled and then laid me back into the exact same skid as if they liked the shape best. My mirrors threw back the reflection of the deer eyes, then chose to reflect nothing at all, and my own face floated in the glass a fraction slow, a man who would blink in a moment. The hazard ticked slowed again, the beat drawing long like an apology you're sure you will not get. If that beat stopped, I felt the fog would simply breathe in and put me under its tongue. Dispatch said, cheerful to hide worry, that the state patrol would be there in 5. I asked which 5. He didn't laugh. GPS has you crossing mile 232 right now, he said. I looked at the invisible mile marker and felt the floor give under that sentence. Stay put, he added. Keep your hazards. Then he said my name in the voice of a man reading a list, and I heard my own voice answer from near the fog line where no one stood. You know how your name sounds wrong coming from your mouth when you are afraid? It sounded wrong from everywhere at once. I took my flare kit because doing something is a kind of prayer. The highway signs had vanished, but a plank of metal leaned out of the fog ahead with letters swallowed in gray. In OWH, it read, and I added the rest in my head like a flavor that belongs. The deer moved along the edge with me, or something wearing its stare, eyes sheened with hazard pulses that came late, like the reflection traveled farther than the light. I cracked a flare, the hiss of straw fire heartbeat, and held it up high. The fog drank the red and hummed. Where the light should have shown the road, I saw instead a film of myself in the cab with my hands on the wheel and my mouth moving. You can sit and wait, or you can step off the map. That is the choice the road gave me. Sit in the cab and let the ticks slow to silence. Or walk into the fog where Blake's voice and the deer's eyes and my own breath asked me to come be measured. I locked the cab out of habit, old superstition, and walked into the white until the hazard light was a red blink in milk. The voices resolved into scenes like windows. My winter accident replayed with different angles. Blake stepping out to wave and losing his footing more times than he lost it once. My apology looping, the fog handing it back to me in a different tense. I kept walking, expecting the median, the rail, the gravel. Each step landed on smooth new pavement. The hazard tick stretched thinner and thinner behind me until each beat ran the length of a thought. When I turned, the truck was there in front of me, angled across both lanes like a lesson that refuses to be learned. The deer stood beneath the NOWH sign, and its eyes threw a brighter red, as if my lights were in them rather than on the hood. The sign shifted when I blinked so that the letters finished themselves neatly. Nowhere. The pole held nothing to the ground. I talked to the fog the way you talk to a dog you want to leave you alone. I told it my name, and it repeated the last syllable as if that were where the bone marrow lived. I offered the truth about Blake, about how I was the one who said we could make it without chains, and the fog let that sit like a coin it did not light, but would keep. The hazard tick lengthened again. I could not tell if it wanted me to consider the seconds or to forget them. It felt like a trap that fed on tidy rules, so I broke one that pays bills. I crawled under the trailer and pulled the red glad hand line, bleeding the air and locking the brakes with a hiss that sounds like every mistake I have ever made. The hazard rhythm barked once in protest. The rig groaned and settled deeper into its angle, a groan that made my teeth ache. I climbed back up and killed the switch entirely. Silence hit me like a wave against my sternum. The fog perked, interested, and the deer's mirrors turned black because there was nothing left to wear. I took the horn lanyard and laid in a new beat. Long, short, short, long. I counted like a childhood game where a new pattern means you made it home safe. The fog flinched the way a horse flinches at a strange hand. The rig did not move. The road under me considered being a road, and then did not. My breath fogged inside the cab the way breath does in winter, even though it was not winter. I used my fist on the dash for a thrift store drum. I sang the ugliest bar of a song I know, so off-key the glass should have broken. Sometimes chaos is a rope. A second rig appeared in the mirror, then a phantom copy sliding past in my blind spot. The tail lights were my tail lights. The bumper sticker was my company's, peeling at the corner, just so. I reached for the door without meaning to. Outside, the fog shaped itself into the cab's interior and filled it with a man who looked like me, down to the way I carry tension in my left shoulder. He put both hands on the wheel and his face did not blur in the glass. He breathed on the window and did not fog it. Dispatcher's voice said, "Steady now, you're moving fine," and I understood the map was following him, not me. I called myself from my work phone out of an old superstition. The ring came from inside the cab, even though my cell was in my pocket. The other me checked a phone I could not see and nodded like someone asked him a question he expected. The horn rhythm I beat began to sound muffled, like I was under a blanket with a clock. I stepped out of the cab on instinct before I got folded into the wrong side of the glass. When my boots hit the pavement, the nowhere sign tilted its head as if to watch a trick. I decided, if a map loved that driver and not me, if the hazard tick inside the loop had kept this fog polite, I would end the politeness and leave the name behind. I took my license from the visor and stuck it face down in the crack of the dash. I took the company badge off my jacket and pinned it to the seat where the other me sat. I said out loud, not to you, not to anyone, that I was no one the road needed to track. The fog approved in a shift of cool air across my teeth. Then I walked straight into it until the tick was only memory. The deer kept pace at my side. I'm mirrors dead now, just holes where red used to live. Blake's voice moved ahead and asked me to bring the chain and then laughed like he did before Bad Bridges. I answered him, and the fog swallowed the words and did not give them back, which was kinder than repeating them wrong. My hand found fence wire a yard off the shoulder I couldn't see. I followed the wire like a child follows a story along the spine. I do not know how long I walked by measure. The fog stopped offering scenes and started breathing like a person asleep. The smell of wet asphalt gave up, leaving cold and nothing else. My boots struck gravel at last, then weeds, and then dirt with the kind of forgiving give that means ditch. I came up on a service road bleached by high beams I couldn't identify. The strip of sky above it had paled, as if morning had decided I could borrow it for a minute. Behind me, something clanged the way a tow truck's hook clanks when it bites. I stood in the weeds and watched two troopers work a chain, my rig already straightened, my cab open, no driver. They said my name as if calling to a barn. I waved and the fog put my arm somewhere else. They looked right through me and then wrote in their notebooks that the driver must have walked up the road and would be found, which is bravery of a certain administrative kind. Dispatch called my cell and asked if I was all right because the GPS showed I was a mile ahead, still making time. I slept that afternoon and went back at dusk to collect my dash cam from the shop. The mechanic plugged it into his laptop because he likes gossip and handed me the earphones with a look that said he wanted me to have a good story either way. The footage was ordinary until it wasn't. At the moment I cut the airline, the camera held me a second too long, then lost me without pan, without blur, just no one in the cab between frames. The hazards ticked in the soundtrack for a few more stretched beats. The horn bled a heartbeat that wasn't mine. Then a hand came into view to set the badge on the seat, just so, but I had already done that. You want an ending you can hold? I am trying. I paid the penalty, filed the accident report that calls what happened a weather event, and my dispatcher told me to take a long weekend for sleeping jokes. At home, a spot of moisture appears on my windshield every few nights in the shape of the letters NOWH. It dries before it decides on ERE. Sometimes a deer stands at the back fence and blinks at the porch light with mirrors so polite they show only the night behind me, not the man I am now. If you ever jackknife into silence and find yourself the only heartbeat on a road that does not reflect you back, listen to your hazards. If they slow, understand that you're not a metronome. You are a man with a choice. Sit tight and let a map pick another you to deliver the freight, or step off the road with your name left safe somewhere and make for the wire that lines the weeds. One of those choices returns you to something that can call itself morning. The other is a longer wait than you want. I still drive nights. When the fog bellies up from the ditches and the air smells like rain without clouds, I turn my hazards on for 2 beats, just 2, and let them teach the dark how to count. Then I turn them off before the road learns me again. You might say that sounds like superstition. Maybe it is. But if you ever see a sign that spells NOWH and you feel certain what it means, look away before it finishes the word. Would you like me to craft the closing outro for the full video and a short call to action, or should I tweak anything in this final story first? And that's it for tonight's journey down the loneliest highways. 5 trucker horror stories that remind us the road doesn't just carry freight. It carries memory, silence, and sometimes things that learn your name when they shouldn't. If you made it this far, you're braver than most. The next time you see a wet road sign under a dry sky, or hear brake lights pulsing like a heartbeat, or notice the gas station clock that never changes, you'll remember these stories. Maybe you'll keep driving. Maybe you'll stop and listen. Just remember, morning isn't promised everywhere. Thank you for riding along with Whispering Abyss tonight. If you enjoyed these tales, leave a like to keep the rig rolling, and share which story haunted you most in the comments below. Did it happen at exit 41, in the convoy that wasn't there, or at that gas station where morning never comes? I'd love to hear your theories. Until next time, keep your lights on, your radio clear, and never assume the road ahead belongs to you. Because sometimes, the road remembers you more than you remember it.